The floor of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange is a boiling sea of humanity and noise. Traders in heavy wool coats scream until their throats bleed, waving scraps of paper that represent a dream of spice and silver. Outside the stone walls, the gray water of the Amstel River laps against the hulls of ships destined for a world that does not yet know their name. It is 1602, and the world's first corporate monster is being born in a riot of ink and greed. Silver coins clink on counting tables as wealthy merchants and desperate widows alike pour their life savings into a single gamble. They are buying shares in the Dutch East India Company, a name that will soon echo across every ocean on the planet. For decades, small fleets of Dutch ships have been racing toward the east, fighting each other as much as the sea. Prices for pepper and cloves are crashing because there is too much competition and not enough control. The Dutch government sees the chaos and realizes that a fractured nation cannot defeat the mighty Portuguese Empire. They force the rival merchants together, creating a singular entity with powers that belong only to kings. This new company, the VOC, is granted the legal right to build its own fortresses, coin its own currency, and maintain its own private army. They are no longer just merchants. They are a sovereign state that exists for the sole purpose of profit. Every signature on the founding charter is a declaration of war. Life aboard a departing company ship is a slow-motion struggle against death and the vastness of the ocean. Below the creaking wooden decks, the air is thick with the smell of rotting salt beef, stagnant water, and the unwashed bodies of 300 men. As the coastline of Europe disappears, the reality of a 2-year voyage begins to settle into their bones like a fever. Scurvy turns their gums into soft, bleeding sponges, while their teeth loosen in their sockets from a lack of fresh greens. The sailors sleep in damp hammocks, listening to the relentless rhythm of waves crashing against the oak hull. They are the human fuel for a corporate machine that values their lives at less than a single sack of black pepper. The target of this floating war machine is a tiny cluster of volcanic peaks in the middle of a turquoise sea. These are the Banda Islands, the only place on Earth where the nutmeg tree grows in the wild. To the people of 17th century Europe, these small, hard seeds are more precious than gold or diamonds. Nutmeg is a status symbol for the rich, a medicine for the sick, and a flavor that masks the taste of aging meat. The VOC wants every single tree, every leaf, and every seed for itself. They do not want a fair market. They want a total monopoly that allows them to set the price for the entire world. A map of the ocean is now a scoreboard of corporate dominance. Jan Pieterszoon Koen stands on the deck of his flagship with a cold, calculating gaze that terrifies even his own officers. He is the newly appointed Governor General, a man who believes that trade cannot exist without war, and war cannot exist without trade. When the local Bandanese leaders refuse to stop selling their spices to the English, Koen decides to solve the problem with blood. He sends in his private army of Japanese mercenaries and Dutch soldiers to burn the villages to the ground. Thousands of indigenous people are hunted through the jungle, captured, and executed under the tropical sun. The screams of the dying are the opening notes of a corporate empire that will stop at nothing to secure its annual dividend for the shareholders. On the ruins of a conquered port in Java, the Dutch begin to build a ghost of Amsterdam in the humid heat of the tropics. They call it Batavia, a city of stone walls and stagnant canals carved directly out of a malaria-infested swamp. Heavy brick houses rise where jungle once stood, their windows looking out over a harbor filled with hundreds of company ships. The air is a thick soup of coal smoke, spices, and the stench of open sewers that kill as many people as the war does. Inside the fortress walls, the company elite live in luxury, drinking imported wine, while 10,000 enslaved laborers and Chinese migrants build the foundations of their power. It is the beating heart of a global machine. The company directors in Amsterdam soon realize that the real fortune is not just in shipping spices back home to Europe. They discover a complex web of Asian trade that has existed for centuries, and they decide to insert themselves into its core. They ship Japanese silver to China to buy precious silk, then trade that silk in India for colorful textiles that the people of Indonesia desire. By acting as the middleman for the entire continent, the VOC generates wealth that exceeds the budgets of most European kingdoms combined. Their ships are no longer just visitors. They are the police of the sea, demanding tribute from every merchant who dares to cross their path. This internal trade becomes a self-sustaining engine that fuels their expansion across the globe. A heavy mist hangs over the water as a Portuguese fleet emerges from the horizon, their white sails marked with red crosses. The order to clear for action ripples through the Dutch ship, and the quiet beauty of the morning is shattered by the deafening roar of cannons. Iron balls rip through the oak hulls, sending thousands of lethal wooden splinters flying across the decks like shrapnel. The heat of the black powder smoke fills the air, stinging the eyes of the gunners as they shove heavy iron loads into the bronze barrels. Men scream in the chaos of blood and smoke as the two wooden giants lock together for a final, desperate boarding action. This is the brutal reality of corporate competition, where the only legal contract is written in fire. Back in Amsterdam, the wealth of the East is transforming the city into a glittering monument to capital and success. The dividends paid out by the VOC reach as high as 40%, creating a class of wealthy citizens who have never seen a spice tree. Canal houses with intricate stone carvings rise along the waterways, their rooms filled with Chinese porcelain, Persian carpets, and the finest Dutch paintings. Even ordinary bakers and housemaids begin to save their copper coins to buy tiny fractions of shares, hoping to ride the wave of corporate glory. The city smells of money and foreign tea, a place where the world's first stock market has made greed a respectable virtue. Everything in the Republic is now measured by the fluctuating price of a single share. The directors of the VOC know that maintaining a fleet across two oceans is a gamble of unimaginable scale and danger. A single storm or a sudden shift in political winds can send millions of guilders to the bottom of the deep sea. Managing these global risks requires a level of security and foresight that most people of the 17th century simply cannot fathom. In the modern world, the risks are no longer wooden ships in storms, but digital data being hunted by invisible threats. Protecting your assets is just as critical today as it was when the Dutch ships were dodging pirates in the Indian Ocean. Now, we return to the peak of the company that once held the entire world in its iron grip. By the middle of the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company has become the most valuable entity in human history. If you calculate its worth in today's currency, the company is valued at an astronomical $7.9 trillion. This makes the modern giants like Apple and Google look like small family businesses in comparison to the Dutch monster. They control a fleet of 150 merchant ships and 40 heavy warships, all manned by 10,000 private soldiers. From the tip of South Africa to the ports of Japan, the company logo is the only authority that matters to millions of people. They have achieved the ultimate corporate dream of becoming a power that is far too large for any single nation to control. Deep inside the warehouses of Batavia, the first signs of rot are beginning to spread through the foundation of the empire. A low-level clerk hides a handful of dried cloves in his boots, knowing that a single pocketful is worth more than his monthly salary. Corruption becomes so widespread that the men on the ground begin to joke that the initials VOC actually stand for Vergaan onder corruptie. This means the company is literally being ruined by the greed of its own employees and officers. Directors are skimming profits, captains are running their own private trade on the side, and the middle managers are accepting massive bribes from local rulers. The machine is still moving, but the gears are being ground down by the very same avarice that once created it. The cost of maintaining a private empire across the globe begins to weigh heavily on the company's once bottomless silver treasury. They are fighting a dozen different wars at once, from the coast of India to the remote islands of the Philippines. Each fortress requires hundreds of soldiers who must be fed, clothed, and paid in a world where supply lines are thousands of miles long. The price of black powder and iron cannons is rising, while the value of spices in Europe is starting to slowly decline. The company is trapped in a cycle of constant expansion just to pay for the defenses of the territories they have already conquered. They are a shark that must keep moving forward through blood and fire, or it will eventually sink and die. The horizon is dark with the sails of the British Royal Navy as the two most powerful nations on Earth go to war. It is 1780, and the British have decided to finally crush the Dutch monopoly and take the world for themselves. Their warships are faster, their cannons are more modern, and their navy is far more organized than the aging corporate fleet of the VOC. The trade routes that once moved silver and silk are now blocked by hostile ships, leaving Dutch cargo to rot in tropical warehouses. The company is losing its connection to the source of its wealth as the British begin to systematically dismantle their ports. The era of the global superpower is being replaced by the era of the global superpower. An accountant in the Amsterdam office stares at a ledger through the dim light of a flickering candle, his hands shaking with fear. He realizes that the company has not actually made a real profit in over a decade, despite the outward appearance of luxury. To keep the shareholders happy and the stock price stable, the directors have been paying out massive dividends using borrowed money. They are sitting on a mountain of debt that is growing faster than any nutmeg tree in the islands of the East. The world's first mega corporation is now a hollow shell, held together by nothing more than the memory of its former glory and the trust of its investors. The bubble is stretched to its limit, and the first cracks are appearing in the glass. In the year 1799, the inevitable finally happens, and the Dutch East India Company is officially declared bankrupt and dead. The government of the Dutch Republic is forced to step in and take over the company's massive debts and its remaining colonial territories. This is the first time the world witnesses the concept of a business being too big to fail, requiring a state rescue to prevent total collapse. The founding charter that once gave the VOC the power of a king is now just a scrap of historical paper in a vault. The private army is disbanded, the fortresses are handed over to the state, and the corporate flags are lowered for the final time. The reign of the merchants has ended, but the consequences of their greed are eternal. When the final accounts are settled, the true cost of the company is written in the lives of millions who never saw a dividend. The VOC transformed the world, but it did so through the lens of systematic slavery, forced labor, and the total erasure of indigenous cultures. They treated human beings like commodities on a ledger, moving thousands of enslaved people across the ocean to work on their plantations until they died. The lush islands of the East were turned into industrial zones, where the pursuit of profit was the only law that anyone was required to follow. The blood that was spilled in the spice groves of Banda still stains the history of global capitalism, a dark reminder that the search for wealth always comes at a terrifying price. The Dutch East India Company is long dead, but the modern world is a mirror image of the systems they first designed in Amsterdam. Every time a share is traded on a digital exchange or a corporation exerts influence over a government, the ghost of the VOC is watching. They invented the limited liability company, the global stock market, and the idea that a business could exist as its own legal person. Our world of interconnected trade and massive corporate power was born in the spice-scented counting houses of a group of Dutch merchants who wanted to own the horizon. We are still living in the shadow of their ambition, continuing to dig for profit in a world that they reshaped in their own image.